Let's get to it, though, because there were a lot of things the owners did yesterday and one significant thing they did not do, at least not for now. Let's summarize and review the changes that were made to expand the Rooney Rule. Now for head coaching positions, not just one minority candidate must be interviewed, but two. Double the existing standard that has been in place for 18 years. Also, there must be at least one minority candidate interviewed for each of the three coordinator positions. Offensive, defensive, and special teams coordinator must be a minority candidate interviewed for each job. One minority candidate for senior football operations or GM jobs. That's been in place for a while. That rule specifically has not changed. Now, when talking about non-football executive jobs, teams must include minority and or female applicants for those positions. Club presidents, senior executives in various positions outside the football realm, but part of the football operation. An important change here, something that many think has been needed for a very long time. Teams no longer allowed to block assistants from interviewing for coordinator jobs. So if you can get a promotion elsewhere to a coordinator, the team can't say, sorry, you're under contract. We can't let you go. We're not letting you go. You have to stay here. Also, expansion of minority coaching fellowships with each team creating a full-time position. The key, though, is this, and all the other stuff is great, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to praise the league for doing what needs to be done to enhance diversity in the National Football League. But the biggest news out of what happened on Tuesday was the decision to table the measure that would have rewarded teams for hiring a coach or a GM with a minority background. That was controversial, but it felt like it was going to get rammed through. It felt like it was a done deal. It felt like it was going to happen. And here is Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the league, and Troy Vincent, the executive VP of football operations, after yesterday's vote, explaining the tabling process and where it goes from here.
We table resolutions frequently because the discussion leads to other ideas that actually can make it even more effective. And so I think between Art and I and some of the members of the committee, have talked to virtually every club. There was a great deal of support, but there's also some suggestions, amendments, and thoughts that we may want to go back and talk to others, including the Principal Alliance, and try to strengthen it. Just to remind you all that this won't go into effect until the end of the calendar year. So we hope that we will be meeting again in person several times before.
There's no rush for this. We got people's attention. The commissioner, the chairman got people's attention. Let's get this right. There is some value here. Coach Dungy said it right. We shouldn't be paying for people to do the right thing.
And there's the confirmation that Coach Dungy was a very influential voice in the process, derailing what, again, many thought was a done deal. And look, let's be real on this. The measure doesn't get tabled if there's 24 or more votes to pass it. This is what happens in lieu of saying we voted and it failed, guys. So if they would have taken a vote, it would have failed yesterday. But they do want to continue to talk about it. And that's all that Coach Dungy and others were asking for. Let's continue to have the discussion about ways to go forward. So, Peter, let me start with you. Your thoughts on the decision not to go forward with this measure that would have created a specific reward for hiring a minority coach or general manager.
Well, Mike, I never thought this was a done deal. I know you and I spoke at one point over the weekend, and the people I talked to in the league, one of them who's very influential said this one is too close to call. Because there are people who feel like, when I wrote in my column about Louis Riddick. So Louis Riddick, the ESPN commentator, probably has come as close to anyone in the last 2 or 3 years to getting a general manager's job who didn't get it. He came in number 2 to Dave Gettleman with the Giants in December 2017. And as he said to me, he said, look, the reason I don't like this is the first day you walk in the building, you're going to have people look at you and wonder, Did they hire you because you're really good at your job, or did they hire you because they get a draft advantage by hiring you? And although I'm not sure that's the way people would think, that's what Louis Riddick thinks is the way people would think. So I think that there are many influential people around the NFL who entered yesterday afternoon's virtual meeting with all the owners in the league, basically saying, look, if the people who we're really listening to here, Tony Dungy and Louis Riddick, are adamantly opposed to this, those are probably right now the two leading voices inside football, who are African American. Neither of them like it. So why are we doing this? And I kind of agree with that. And look, whether it would have passed or not passed, I tend to think you're right, Mike. I don't think it would have passed. But I do think that the smartest thing for the league to do is to go back and use the next 3, 4, 5 weeks. These guys are all just sitting at home anyway. And I don't mean they're not doing anything else. Of course they are. But they're sitting at home anyway. Let's get a more refined and refocused view of what this rule should be, and then repropose it either at another league meeting, before the start of the year. Honestly, Mike, as somebody told me, we have until the normal October fall meeting to get all the T's crossed and all the I's dotted on a new rule, on a new rule that may involve draft choice compensation.
Well, listen, I agree with, all of you, Louis Riddick, Tony Dungy. Yeah, who's better to listen to than those two? They got a great feel for the NFL. And, of course, they're African-American men who have been in the league, know what it takes to be successful in the league, and also know what it will be to demean or diminish an African-American coaching candidate or one that does get a job by this rule being set forth. I just think it would have caused more I don't think it would have passed either. I mean, I agree with you guys. I just think it would have really caused more issues than been a positive thing. And I think it would have caused real resentment in the NFL coaching world if that were to happen too. So, the big thing is I like a lot of the steps that were made yesterday. I do think it's something in the right direction. But I think really the genius of all this is the fact that, where we are in this conversation, and I'm blanking on the specific name, Mike, that threw this original idea out here about draft compensation and things like that. But either way, it was such a drastic, move. Our eyes lit up. And here we are, we've been talking about it for a few days, and I think that's the most important thing, that now we're going to get people's brains to stew, and you're going to have more conversations, and people are going to find better ways to get something positive out of this.
I think one of the keys here was Coach Dungy speaking directly to individuals in the league who have these high-level jobs. He told me on Monday he talked to African-American coaches in the league. What are your concerns about this? And they had multiple concerns. The perception when you do show up for the first day on the job, how other coaches will view you. Will there be this sense that the only reason you got the job was because there was a reward out there? And I've heard the debate, guys, about, well, it really isn't that much of a reward, so it really isn't going to influence behavior. Well, why the hell is it on the table then? The mere fact that that's the reward, the mere fact that somebody decided you're going to get a 6-spot bump in round 3 if you hire a minority coach, or a 10-spot bump in round 3 if you hire a minority general manager, the fact that they've identified that as the reward for making that move shows it has value. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. So it becomes a chicken and the egg thing very quickly, but they put it on the table, and anyone who hires a minority coach or GM, there's going to be a normal conclusion by outsiders and some insiders that was a factor in all of that. The other thing that has been tabled that I think, and I think this is where it's going to end up, Peter, I'm going to start with you again on this. When the dust settles on this, when they have a final vote in October or whenever, the draft pick element is going to be couched as compensation for teams that have groomed and developed minority coaches and lose them to coordinator jobs or head coaching jobs elsewhere. That was part of this proposal. It didn't get a whole lot of attention because the more controversial aspect did. But I think, and reading between the lines yesterday of the things said and not said by Roger Goodell and Troy Vincent, I think the end result will be no reward for actually hiring a minority coach or GM. You get compensation for losing a minority assistant coach that you have spent time developing who gets hired by somebody else into a bigger role.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, I've thought of that. But to me, that, although it is significant, okay, that is not nearly as big as the other proposal that did not get voted on. Because I'll tell you, if you lose a coach that you have groomed and developed, and somebody says, okay, here, whatever it's decided on, here's a 4th or 5th round compensatory pick for that, I don't think anybody bats an eye on that. I really don't, because you are losing something. If the Kansas City Chiefs lose Eric Bieniemy to be a head coach next year, and they get a 4th round compensatory pick, and they get the, whatever it is, 140th pick in the draft. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to say, well, they didn't deserve that, or that's not right, because, it just seems, to me, it kind of seems fair. You were the farm system to develop that coach to be a head coach in the NFL. So Bill Belichick, retroactively, I'm not saying that they will, should get a 4th round pick for developing Brian Flores and, the Miami Dolphins, hiring him to be a head coach. The other one is so much more significant to me because of what it carries with it. And that is the stigma that the only way you hired me is because, not the only way, but a predominant reason why you hired me is because I'm African American, and if it's a general manager position, you can improve from, let's just say, 70 to 60 in the draft, and that's a big chunk, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, that obviously is the more lightning rod conversation. But I think in a lot of ways, Mike, this is something that you and I talked about a lot yesterday. I do like the compensatory picks for, yes, grooming an African-American coach, having him come up through your system and then losing him. Yeah, I think that gives teams a little bit of incentive to, delve down that tunnel a little bit more that they don't do enough right now. So to me, I like that aspect of it. I do. I think it really, and again, there's some other things here I know we're going to talk about, but I do think it has to start at that root level, that very base entry level for a lot of these teams, and especially for minority African-American coaches. If we want to see more of them throughout the league in GM jobs and head coaching jobs, we just got to see more of them involved in the football business in general. And like I said yesterday, it's just very hard to get into this secret society coaching football world. I mean, hey, my dad won a Super Bowl and played 15 years. Hey, Dad, can you call a few teams? Hey, Dad, I called a few teams. Nobody got back to me. It doesn't matter. You have to have serious connections and work a lot of pipelines. And that's why we see so many family members. And like we said, Mike, people who know the owner and know the GM and their sons are working in the building. So that's where I like the compensatory pick idea for grooming African-American coaches. It gets them in the building and gives teams incentives to do that.
And really, from the standpoint of where this all goes from here, if there isn't support for the reward for hiring a minority coach or GM, what will the final product look like? And I base my assessment on a question that was posed to the commissioner yesterday by Jarrett Bell of USA Today, who said, how do you reconcile the concept of a reward with a disadvantage to other teams who get leapfrogged in the draft process by teams that have gotten this 6-spot bump, this 10-spot bump? And the commissioner's response focused on the concept of compensation for losing a coach. Didn't say anything at all about this notion of rewarding a team that hires a minority coach or GM. a very subtle, but I think a very real indication as to where the ball is moving. And I think that at the end of the day, they're not going to do it, Peter. I think your read on it, this notion that there will be a perception, and perception can be reality, that even though it isn't some great reward, it's not a first-round pick, it's not an extra $30 million in cap space or something like that, it's just a bump in round 3, it's enough that it will cause problems for the men who get these jobs as they walk through the door, and they may be thinking from the get-go that the only reason, or not the only reason, but the tiebreaker, the last reason, there was some advantage cultivated by giving me the job as opposed to a non-minority. And that just isn't the way that you want to start a job like this. You want to start a job like this in a positive way, feeling like you were the best person for the job, that you earned this spot, that there was no artificial incentive that was available by hiring you that wasn't available by hiring someone else. So, Peter, I think your read on it's on the money. And if I had to predict now, I'd say this thing is dead, it's gone, and we're never going to hear from it again.
Mike, remember back in February and March when D. Smith was, fighting with his own union, basically, to try to get the new CBA passed. And I just kept thinking to myself, what is wrong with this picture? D. Smith has been negotiating with the league, and he got a deal along with, his many in his board and a couple notably who didn't want it. But he's been negotiating and fighting to get this deal. And now his own players don't want it. Many of them don't want it. And as I reported at the time, it was the equivalent of 30 players in every locker room. 30, who did not want this deal. And yet it passed. But it reminded me, when I was thinking about this, I said, what would be really odd about this? If the NFL passes this rule and Troy Vincent and Roger Goodell said, we're doing something for the equality of the African-American coaches and for the candidates who would be general managers in front offices. And then, so now ESPN Sports Center goes to Tony Dungy and says, what do you think, coach? And they go to Louis Riddick in his box from his home. And they both said, this is a sham. I hate it. It stinks. So that's one of the reasons now why I think they got to find something else to try to fix it.
Yeah, they got to find something else. I mean, we talked about it. It's demeaning almost. It's a stupid idea, really. And listen, hey, guys, we've all been around like Mike Tomlin and Anthony Lynn, right? Two of the best African-American coaches in the league, two really awesome coaches in general. They're no nonsense, no BS, in your face, work hard. They did everything right to get that job. They don't want to walk into a building and have that stigma over them, or somebody that's like them in the future to have that stigma of, hey, we gave you, I'm here because my team got a reward. Yeah, I did some good things, but the reward really got it done. No, that's where it's bad. And I think that's where Roger Goodell avoided kind of talking in that language yesterday that you talked about, Mike, and referred to, because I think they realize it's not the right road to go down here with this conversation.
All right, and it will again be taken up. There'll be more discussion, more conversation. My prediction, though, is that the specific reward for hiring a minority coach or GM, that's done. The compensation angle, I think, will reemerge and will be put in place. And also, look, this is just the first step. They are going to revolutionize the hiring process. That's something else Tony Dungy told me on Monday. Delaying the start of the hiring process, that's coming. Other steps are coming. This was just the first one. It was a big one. One big angle of it was left out, but more is to come over the next year or two in this revolution of the hiring process. The notion that teams will not be allowed to prevent assistant coaches from interviewing for promotions elsewhere. Look, there was a time years ago where teams could not stand in the way of a guy who was getting a promotion on a coaching staff with another team. They changed the rules to force these guys to stay put. There have been some teams that have been notorious about it. You're under contract. We're not going to let you interview for a job elsewhere unless it's a head coaching job, even if it's a promotion. Now that goes away. This has been needed by the NFL, regardless of the race of the candidate. It's just a fairness issue. Let guys pursue opportunities to enhance their careers. It's all about upward mobility. If you're doing a good job and someone else notices it and they want to hire you for a bigger job, then you should be allowed to go seek that bigger job. It's that simple, Chris. So, I'm glad they finally got to the point where they needed to be. However it took to get there, as part of an expansion of the Rooney Rule, whatever, they've finally done the right thing here and gotten rid of this ability for teams to squat on guys who could be making more money, having more authority, and further developing their career by going to a different team.
You're right. I mean, you're squatting on guys' careers, and then sometimes for a coach, you get on you've worked hard for, let's say, 15 or 20 years. Now you got 2 or 3 years of success and things are going in the right direction. You want to get interviewed by a team, right? And all of a sudden you get blocked. Oh, and now the team that you're working for starts to fall apart. And now you never have that chance to go get an interview again. You got to almost, rework your magic and, get the perception out there that you're worthy of an interview again. So, yes, that's what, squatting on guys or blocking them from interviewing, let alone, Mike, it really ultimately hurts the league. It does, because it keeps some of the best candidates and the best minds and the people that might be, best for the job not in the conversation. Just because the guy, he's been blocked, maybe he's the most qualified guy, maybe he's a genius that's been under a Sean Payton or a Bill Belichick for a long, long time, but they gave him a tough title and now he can't go interview because this next job isn't enough of a bump up or whatever it may be. All those things were stupid and I think ultimately hurt the ability of the league to get the best and most creative coaches to be the head coaches and make our game better and more fun.
Look, I just want you to imagine how, and look, this is not the biggest thing in the world, but think about how history might have been changed this year, just a little bit, okay? Philadelphia Eagles, Doug Peterson, who's the coach of the Eagles, wants to interview Mike Kafka as his offensive coordinator, okay? Mike Kafka is the quarterback coach in Kansas City. He's been great in Kansas City. He's a rising star. The way Andy Reid does his coaching staff, honestly, is that he prepares guys and kind of grooms guys to take that next step. He did it with Doug Peterson, became the Eagles head coach in 2016. 2017, Matt Nagy becomes the head coach of the Chicago Bears. And now in 2019, at the end of 19, he wants Eric Bieniemy really to, fly out of the nest and become a head coach somewhere. That didn't happen. But he had Mike Kafka ready to ascend to the offensive coordinator job in Kansas City. He did not want to lose Kafka because he is next in line to be the offensive coordinator. So Andy Reid can stop him under the old rules, okay? And he prevents him from going to Philadelphia and interviewing for the OC job. Now they give him, a better title, passing game coordinator now. But really, it really doesn't change a lot of things in the day-to-day life of Mike Kafka's job. He just got a better title and probably a little bit more money. But that is what the difference now is. Whereas the Eagles could have had Mike Kafka a year later had they so chosen. They don't get him, and Kafka has to stay back in Kansas City. That is where this rule is really going to impact teams in 2020 and beyond.
And the only argument I ever heard against or in support rather of this ability to squat on assistants is, hey, if you want to have mobility, only sign 1-year contracts. In other words, when you sign a multi-year deal, you have security in the event that everybody is fired. Well, the other side of the coin of that security is you're stuck here now. You've signed a 3-year contract or a 4-year contract, whatever the case may be. But you know what? A lot of teams won't give you a 1-year contract if you want one. And it's just not a good way to do business having guys on 1-year contracts. I mean, the bottom line is if there are individuals who are in a position where they can advance their careers and you're not in a position to give them that promotion and someone else is, then you wish them the best and you have faith in your ability to reload the organization underneath that guy who has departed. And for the Chiefs, who constantly have the confidence they can reload the offensive coordinator position, well, they're going to have to reload positions even lower on the totem pole. So be it. That's what teams are going to have to be ready to do, Chris.
Yeah, well, that's right. And hey, you squat on a coach and do that. Like, yeah, it might be the only opportunity that guy has to make a big move in his career. So, yeah, you're ruining livelihoods that way. And I understand, somewhat of why the rule was in place. But, bigger picture, too, and I think one of the big reasons we're in this whole conversation right now and with the minority coaching candidates, too, is just a subject that just, kind of came up organically here, which is the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think this is really the root of the problem and why we're at a point with this conversation right now. I don't know. You tell me, how do the optics look? Let's see. Doug Peterson, offensive coordinator, Kansas City Chiefs for 2 years, gets a head coaching job. Matt Nagy, offensive coordinator for 2 years, gets a head coaching job. Eric Bieniemy, offensive coordinator of the Chiefs, 2 years, offense is the best in football and explodes and has the quarterback whisperer effect and doesn't get a job and doesn't even really in high demand or command or anything like that. That to me, and again, I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but I think that's why we are where we are right now. The optics of that do not look right, and we need more diversity. And sorry, it just kind of came up to me there. I didn't mean to totally change the subject, but you guys kind of went down that road and led me there, and I couldn't help it.
No, but I think it makes sense. I think it's a legitimate point, Peter, the idea that because Eric Bieniemy's failure to get an NFL head coaching job has become so glaring, that's one of the main reasons why they've taken this step back and said, we've got to do something, because it makes sense to no one that Eric Bieniemy is not yet a head coach somewhere.
And the other part of it, Mike, that I think the NFL, and I know that they're thinking about this now, is that I think the NFL really needs to very seriously consider pushing back the hiring process and the hiring period until after the Super Bowl. This is not Peter. Just a 2020 thing. This has been an every year thing. It is totally ridiculous that you get penalized for your team being really good and for you doing a great job. Okay, and what I mean by that is that most jobs are spoken for by the time the Super Bowl is over. Okay, and to me, it's categorically unfair. Just categorically unfair. Look at some of the rising stars who've just been ignored. Look at Arthur Smith with the Tennessee Titans. Everybody starts saying, oh my God, look at this Tennessee offense. Look at the passing game even. They haven't had a passing game. With Marcus Mariota, it was just fits and starts. And they've managed to merge the running game and the passing game better, much better than under Matt LaFleur. And he just went 13-3 with the Green Bay Packers. So, to me, wait, press the pause button. And on February 5th, start the process. No interviews until February 5th. If you cheat, you get penalized a draft choice. That is why I think, or that is the way you can make it a level playing field for everyone.
Yeah, Coach Dungy says that is coming. I've heard from others it is coming. The only challenge will be for the teams that don't make it to the playoffs, the bad teams that from a PR standpoint want to show their fan base that they are pointing in the right direction. They're not going to want to wait a month while they otherwise would be going out there and bringing to the fan base, here's the new shiny object, here's the new coach that's going to turn us around. But maybe everyone would be better off. But what if you
can't introduce that shiny object? What if you can't introduce that shiny object for a month? I mean, that's the problem. So Washington had a solution to this. We're going to hire a guy who's out of work. And so we're going to hire Ron Rivera. Okay, so they got their guy. And maybe if it was a month later, they still would have hired Ron Rivera. I assume they would have. But for the most part, all you can do is make informal agreements with these guys anyway. You can't introduce them. Okay, so to me, in my opinion, the way that you have to do this, honestly, is you have to make it fair for everybody. And that means fair for every team and fair for every coach in the process.
All right. Again, that is still to come in the coming months and years. Sooner than later, though, I think they will be pushing back the start of the hiring process when the season ends.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.